Life doesn't pause when you're sick. Vaccines against respiratory illnesses can help protect you and give you more playtime with your best friend. Depending on age and health status, vaccinations for flu, COVID-19, RSV, or pneumococcal infection may be recommended. Vaccines can help keep you from having a rough time. Learn more at cveep.org/vaccines-protect. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and CVEEP, fighting infectious respiratory disease.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Energy to Heal podcast. My name's Laura. I'm your host here, and this is where we talk about all things Splankna, all things emotional healing, trauma recovery, and all things Jesus. So some of these episodes, if you're new here, we're going to cover things that seem like they have nothing to do with Splankna. We're not even going to mention the protocol or what it is in some of these episodes. And the reason for that is because as a practitioner myself, I find myself sitting in front of people and having to say the same things over and over again from a biblical counseling perspective, from a reminding people of their authority perspective. And you guys, this is so important to know and to learn, because when we're in trauma and we're vulnerable and it's so easy to forget who we are, that is when we are most likely to be susceptible to letting that trauma kind of mess us up, get us off track. And the more we know who we are, the more we can stay stable in our mind in those moments, the less likely that event is going to derail us. And maybe you're not in trauma yourself right now, but learning this stuff in some of those kind of episodes will help you reach out to the people that you love in your life that are currently in trauma, and they need a lifeline. They need a reminder of what is true so that their mind, soul, spirit doesn't go down a path that is going to ultimately lead them to isolation or destruction. Today, we're talking about agreement styles. So we really are getting into the Splankna protocol in this episode. I'm going to address this from a master's level perspective, but if you're just a client, this is going to be helpful because you're going to be able to understand what our brain tries to do in times of trauma to get us to survive using these agreements. And it'll hopefully give you some insight into spiritually what happens when we make agreements in the spiritual world. When the enemy comes along and convinces you that either God is useless, you're actually alone in life, you're going to have to figure this all out yourself. All of that is tied to agreements, which are tied to lies we believe. So if you haven't listened to the episode, I believe it's called The Lies We Believe and How to Unlearn Them. That would be a great follow-up episode to this one, because the lies we believe is everyone is under that category. We've all believed lies in our lifetime, and they have a way of twisting us up. This is just the more formal way of addressing those lies. Before I get into that, I'm going to tell you, I am in Omaha one day today. I live here, but I had 2 back-to-back trips. So I just got in last night from Vegas with my 3 sisters and my mom. My youngest sister turned 30, and so we went to go celebrate. We didn't actually stay in Vegas. We stayed a half hour outside of Vegas. Thankfully, it was a lovely little town with literally every building was recreated like Europe. We were totally convinced we were in Spain. Quiet, beautiful, clean little town outside of Vegas. And it was just so fun to get away with the sisters. Such good conversation, such good food. And we did a Cirque du Soleil show, which was a new experience for all of us. But I have to tell you guys, traveling with my mother is got to be one of the funnest things in the world. My mom does not understand the meaning of the word embarrassed. She can have fun literally anywhere she goes. She just wants to laugh. And that was great for us because we wanted to laugh too. So everywhere we went, she made friends. Everywhere we went, she was doing some sort of, I don't know what you call it, a momism. She was doing something that she does, and we're like, oh, of course. But our favorite one was we went to this Mexican restaurant, and Of course, she made friends with the two waiters there. By the end of the night, she was saying, hey, I know you have to go sing happy birthday to that guy over there, that stranger to her. Can I come with you? And they, at this point, we had been talking to these waiters the whole night. They were so funny and friendly. They were like, sure. So they got her some maracas, handed them to her. My mom went over with the staff, 6 other staff members, and sang her heart out to this guy who apparently was a regular at this restaurant, completely embarrassing 2 of the sisters. The other 2 were very thrilled that my mom was doing this, but my mom was dancing and singing happy birthday best she could in this restaurant. If I could, I would show you guys a video because yes, we absolutely did get that on video. And then I came home for one day, which is today, and tomorrow morning I leave for Denver for the master's level training, which happens once a year. It's kind of a refresher for those who want to go in person. And then there will also be people who are getting trained in the master's level for the very first time. So when I come back next week, I'll be able to kind of tell you guys about that trip and what we did and what we learned, what happened. I'm going to be posting videos of this trip on my TikTok account. I have an Energy to Heal TikTok account where I put a lot of just cool stories. Sometimes I try to pull people from the training just to say like, hey, can you just share some amazing stories of what you've seen God do through Splankna? So I'll be posting those. If you want to look for that, you can look for Laura Milliken or the Energy to Heal pod on TikTok. Okay, so let's get into ownership agreements. I am going to make this apply to as many people as possible. Again, if you are a client or a potential client, this is going to be helpful for you because to understand how our brain tries to survive is very, very helpful. And if you know that this is how our brain works, this is how the spiritual world works, you can almost circumvent it a little bit. You can anticipate it coming and you can avoid these pitfalls. If you are a practitioner, this is going to be hopefully a good review for you. If you're core trained, you've been trained in this thing where it's like, okay, someone goes through trauma, they have made a lie, they've started to believe a lie in that trauma, or they made a vow, some sort of vow that's keeping them stuck. Like, I will never, be like my family, or I will always depend on myself, and, something like that. This is going to be next level stuff. But I still want you to hear it because if you're going to continue on in your training, this is where you're headed. If you're not going to continue on in your training, if you just got out of core training within the last month, just listen kind of like from a distance. You don't need to understand this, internalize it. Just a brushed overview of different kind of agreement styles that we make. So I'm going to go over each one. This is not going to be comprehensive. There's going to be parts I'm going to leave out for the sake of time, but just to get into it a little bit. Basically, what we're talking about is this idea that when you go through something traumatic, let's say when you were young, your parents got divorced and it was messy and they fought all the time, and you heard your parents say things that have never left your mind 20 years later. That is traumatic for a child to watch their family get split apart like that. In those trauma moments, our mind, our spirit, and our body are more susceptible to be taken off track because we are desperate for comfort. We're desperate for power. We're desperate for somebody to come alongside and nurture us and take care of us. And instead, we're just feeling very vulnerable, weak, powerless. Nobody's hearing us. We're feeling sad and we don't know what to do with it. So it's just this picture of, I don't know what to do. Trauma has a way of making people feel like they need to either run and hide or protect themselves. And in those vulnerable moments, it's like the enemy can come along and offer us something to get us through the pain. And he loves to do this because we are more likely to say yes when we are in trauma than when we are healthy and strong and connected to God and to our communities and to our friends and we know who we are. So these trauma moments are huge, huge. If you're currently in a trauma moment right now, I just want you to hear this as like a war plan. I want you to hear what the enemy's tactic is. I'm going to give you some pages from his playbook so that you can be ready for them and defiantly stand against any of these. Okay, so let's say we go back to that story. Your parents are separating. You're a young child. You're feeling emotionally overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. The enemy is going to come in and offer you something. Why is he going to do that? Because as believers, the enemy doesn't have any power over us, any control over us, unless we give our agreement to the enemy in some way, shape, or form. Let me give you an example. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were living their best life, just living in the garden, completely in community with God. And the snake, as the Bible tells us, comes along. The enemy comes along and gets in Eve's ear, and he says, "Isn't it crazy how God's holding out on you? It's just wild. Like, if he really loved you, he would let you eat from every tree in the garden, wouldn't he? Don't you think you deserve? Don't you think it's not right?" He starts planting these ideas into her mind of this God who doesn't love her perfectly, but is actually selfish and wants her to be missing out. When you read the story in Genesis, that's the kind of underlining message of it is God says he's good. He says he loves you, but does he really? If he did, why would he put so many boundaries on you? Why would he not let you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And there's the lie. At that moment, she could have told him to be quiet. She could have rejected it. She could have told him how God has provided everything she's ever needed in life. And this is the one tree that he put a boundary around. But instead, she believed the lie. And she said, "Oh, wow, you're right." Her answer was kind of like, "I am missing out." There it was. There was her agreement to the thing that the enemy was offering her, which in that moment was, you deserve. God's holding out on you. And because she believed the lie, that's where everything went south. Okay, so it's similar to that with us. There are 6 different agreements we're going to talk about today: an ownership agreement, a program, a power, a transfer, an assault, and a counter. Now, some of these are way more common than the other ones, but we're going to talk about each one. Okay. Let's say that we go back to that story, that child whose parents split up when they were 10 years old, and it was super traumatic. And you do a Splankna session, and this is the story that comes up when you were 10 years old and your parents separated. The thing you might be breaking off in that Splankna session at the end, and if you're new to this, almost every Splankna appointment is going to end in you breaking some sort of an agreement that you made in a traumatic moment, okay? In a moment of life where the way that you operated changed. An ownership agreement is where the enemy comes along and says, "Hey, you know all that loneliness you're feeling? Or you know all that powerlessness you're feeling? I can take that off your hands. You don't have to carry that. It's going to swallow you up. It's too much for you. Here, just give it to me. I'll take it off your hands." Sounds helpful, right? It sounds like a good idea. Yeah, I am drowning in loneliness. I don't want to carry this anymore. I literally can't carry this anymore. Enemy's like, "No problem. Just go ahead and give it to me." If you have your agreement in an ownership thing, it might honestly give you some reprieve in the moment. But what I have noticed, at least in my own personal observations, is the thing the enemy offers us in the beginning, it might have been an actual survival technique back in the trauma. But then fast forward 10 years, 20 years, that very same thing that helped you survive back then becomes your prison cell in your later years. You can't get out of it. So because the enemy is a liar, always, he's the king of lies, whenever he offers to help us with anything, he's not actually caring about us. Like, I know you guys know that. I feel like I need to be clear about that. He is lying. He's not actually going to help you with your loneliness. He's going to get your agreement to hand all of your loneliness over to him. Why? Because then you're not handing it over to God. He doesn't want you to hand it over to God. He wants you to hand it over to him. And then he has access to you in that area. So this might look like you come to do a session and you're like, I don't have any friends. I can't connect with anyone. I'm a grown adult and I am so alone all the time. I can't make friends at work. I can't make friends at church. I feel like I walk around this entire planet by myself, even when I'm surrounded by people. It's possible that your Splankna session could come up with loneliness as the final emotion. And there was some sort of ownership agreement when you were younger where you were like, I'm going to give over all my rights to this loneliness, because now who owns it? The enemy does. And then he gets to use that place in your life to kind of torment you, keep you stuck, keep you broken, eliminate your literal ability to connect with other people in a meaningful way. So what we would do in that session is we would come in prayer against that loneliness, against that ownership agreement, and say, in the name of Jesus, I take back all ownership over what was mine to begin with. I let go of anything the enemy ever offered to do for me, take care of me. We would do the whole prayer. We would do the spiritual warfare of it. We would repent. We would confess. We would ask the Holy Spirit to fill the places where this agreement was taken up. And you guys, I know it sounds wild, but what I've learned as a practitioner in my trainings and in my own personal research since becoming a Splankna practitioner, the enemy is very legalistic. He works by way of contracts. He can't do and move and pester and manipulate us unless we have essentially signed a contract. So when you make an ownership agreement with the enemy, you are signing a contract essentially saying, you have access. I want you to hold all of my loneliness. In a perfect world, we would ask God to hold our loneliness and trust him to hold it for us and carry it for us. That doesn't always happen in trauma, and that's why we undo that. I'm going to move on to the next one. Next one is a program agreement. This one is the most common. If you go to a Splankna session as a client and it's your first one, there's a very good chance you're going to be breaking a program agreement. Okay. So this is like a fancy way. A program is just a fancy way of saying you have a particular symptom in your life that's just running in the background in you all the time. Okay. It could be affecting your soul, spirit, or your body. An example would be like a program of depression, a program of anxiety, a program of self-hatred. Think of a computer. If you upload a new program into a computer, the computer is going to operate differently. If you upload a new program into yourself, and I know that sounds wild that can happen, but I see it every day that I go to work, then your brain, your body is going to operate differently. And the reason we agree to these programs in the first place is because somehow we think either that it's going to help us or we just agree that it's true. We believe a lie. We believe something is true. And now that thing has the ability to run in us. So I'll give you an example here. I just know that a program agreement is very versatile. It's very wide reaching. It can show up in a lot of different ways. Like if you had come to a session and let's just stick with that loneliness. Let's say loneliness was your last emotion that came up. It was the benefit that came up. And it comes up as not an ownership agreement, but a program agreement. That could look something like, instead of the enemy offering to take this from you, he would convince you that you're destined to be lonely for the rest of your life and there's nothing you can do about it. And then at some point in your trauma, you were like, darn it, that's right. Like, look at me. My family just fell apart. Nobody even knows that I'm hurting. No one's asking me. I have all this pain. I am, and I feel so alone. I guess this is just my lot in life. This is just what life is. it's just me against the world. When you believe that lie, which is contrary to biblical truth, that can upload like a program in you, and you have no idea that it's even there. In your subconscious mind, you're viewing the entire world now through this filter that says, it's me against the world. I can trust nobody. No one will ever be there for me. And then the problem with that is in your future, when somebody tries to be there for you, you will reject it. You won't be able to receive it. You might see it as a threat. You might see it as they're just trying to manipulate me, trying to get something from me. In some way, shape, or form, you will not be able to receive someone's companionship or help or community because this program of loneliness is running in you saying, it's me against the world and there's nothing I can do about it. No one will ever come to help me. Now, I want to be clear as I'm talking about all this. I'm using loneliness as an example, but these agreements can be around literally any emotion on the emotion chart. It could be around over responsibility, suffering, grief, guilt, the need to perform for people all the time, feeling unworthy, stubbornness, resentment, anger, fear, paranoia. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. As I'm just going to stick with this idea of loneliness so you can see how loneliness as a benefit would show up in multiple different kinds of agreements. But just know that based off your personal story, your personal reaction to that story, it could be any emotion that an agreement could be made upon. The other thing I want to say about a program is remember, if you've been trained in this, this is just a reminder that a program agreement can also be external. So my example that I gave you is an internal program of loneliness. This thing running in the background in me all the time that tells me that I'm lonely and there's nothing I can do about it. You can have an external program. And for lack of a better term, this would be like the vibe you give off to people. And not consciously, not trying to, but have you ever met someone that just gave you this, I don't know, this feeling about them? The story that Sarah Thiessen, I remember her telling us this when I went to training for an external program, is she said, I went to this conference and I met this woman and I got in a conversation with her and I just felt annoyed by her. And I was so confused because I didn't know why. She wasn't doing anything annoying. She wasn't really, it wasn't justified that I felt annoyed by her, but I did. And then I found myself saying something to her that felt so mean to me. And I was like, why did I just say that to her? That's not even like me to say something like that to anyone. But what Sarah said is it was kind of like a bullying sentence that she just found herself saying, and it even surprised her as it came out of her mouth. And she said, that is the day that the Lord taught me about external programs. So in trauma, if your program that you agreed to is external, it will cause people to treat you a certain way or get a certain message from you. The way that I think about this to help me make sense of it is it's as if there's people and they wear a sign around their neck, like that lady that Sarah had met that day. She likely had this external program that was saying something like, bully me. I am worthy of being made fun of. I'm worthy of mistreating. Almost like that is the way to interact with her. And who knows where that came from in her own life. But just know that there are things that can be running your, I hate that word vibe, but I don't know, running the feeling you give people when you hang out with them. So you could literally do a Splankna session and say, every time I show up somewhere, it just seems like everybody's annoyed with me. Or it just seems like everything works out for everyone else and things always fall apart for me. And you could ask the Lord and say, like, God, is there some sort of external program going on? Is there something I'm projecting out to the world that's causing this to show up in the way that people treat me? All right, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is a power agreement. Okay, the definition for this one is when a client agrees for a particular power. An example would be like, Your parents split up when you were 10 and got divorced. You agree to the power to save your parents' marriage. Or another example would be if the enemy offered you the power to heal a loved one who's maybe going through a cancer battle, the power to be smart, the power to be rich. When you're breaking any kind of power agreement, this is the one where we're always making sure to place our spiritual boundaries back into God's design, closing up any breaches in spiritual boundaries that agreement created, because we were created to receive all of our power from the Lord. Anything we can operate in, anything we're good at, anything we're gifted in, anything we are able to do, we're created to do it because God gave it to us. And this is the enemy saying, let me give you the power for that. And something in us, subconsciously, spiritually, in trauma, takes the enemy up on that offer because we might be feeling particularly weak or scared or vulnerable to something. So the power to counteract that trauma sounds really, really nice. Now, just a reminder, the enemy is a liar. So if he's offering you the power to do something, you're not always getting the power to be able to do that thing. It could just be a lie that he's offering you just to get you to fall for it. This is why knowing God, being so firmly rooted and planted in the Lord is so important, because we are more likely to know God offers us everything we could ever need. Every struggle I have, I can get through it with what God offers me. I can wait on the Lord and He will rescue me. When those things are deeply embedded into your bones, you are so much less likely to make these agreements with the enemy when he comes along and offers you a way out. The power to do something. If you grew up in a lot of poverty, the enemy could offer you the power to be rich. And if you agree to receive that power from the enemy, you might be stuck in even more poverty than your family even started with, because the enemy is a liar. He is literally offering you the thing that he thinks you are most likely to agree to. Sometimes in a power agreement, the enemy actually does give you the power, which sounds better, but it's not. Anything the enemy offers you, if it's a true power, it all is a prison. Everything he offers us is a strategy to keep us in prison in the future, to keep us stuck, to keep us looking at ourselves instead of God, to keep us looking at him instead of God. Anything he offers us is to tear down our worth, our connection with our Creator, our identity, our authority. He doesn't want us to know any of that. So anything he's offering us is an attempt to take us away from all of those things. The example they give in training is someone might have actually gotten the power from the enemy to hear from spirits. Like you think of palm readers or people who say that they can predict your future. Some of those people are just lying and scamming you and taking your money, but some of them actually have ability to hear and consult with actual spirits. And it's possible that they made a power agreement at some point in their life to have access to that kind of power. And it's not fake. They genuinely are consulting with spirits, but I guarantee you they are not good spirits. They are demonic spirits. And all of that is anything that you actually get power in is not something that's going to benefit you in the long run. It's not something that's going to bring you closer to Jesus. It's going to bring confusion and division and pain in your life. So in that kind of a session, let's go back to my story where you're 10 years old and your parents get divorced, your family falls apart. You might have agreed for the power to save your parents' marriage or to save romantic relationships, to be that kind of a person, which could result in a lot of things. An example of that could just be in your future, every relationship you have falls apart because you made an agreement to save relationships. And the enemy's a liar, so he gave you the exact opposite of what you were bargaining for. All right, we're going to go to the next one. This is a transfer agreement. A transfer agreement happens when the client goes through something and they want to rescue somebody or appease somebody. make somebody proud. But usually it's a rescue attempt. Okay. So a transfer can go in either direction. And I'm reading this straight from the training manual here. Either you're taking something off of someone, like their pain and their suffering, you're trying to take it on yourself so that they don't have to feel it, or you're trying to give something to them. You're watching someone suffer and you want to give them something of yours so that they can get through their suffering easier. An example would be transferring a disease, a weakness that you have or they have, transferring spiritual warfare, anything. Those are just a few examples. It can be a million different things, but something like that in order to save or assist somebody that you love. So think about that. If you were 10, your parents are divorced, your mom is crying herself to sleep every night, you're 10 years old and you want to help her so bad, you know she's in pain, it is very possible in that moment that you made a transfer agreement. And that could look something like you see and feel how lonely and abandoned your mom feels in that moment. And the enemy comes along and says something to you like, I know it's hard to watch your mom go through all this abandonment and all this loneliness. If you want, I could give it to you instead so that your mom could get a little break. And subconsciously, again, guys, we almost never know these things are happening. Subconsciously or spiritually, there's something in us that agrees, like, yeah, I would do that. I would do that for my mom. I'll take her loneliness so that she doesn't have to feel it. There's your agreement. You just signed on the dotted line. Yep, I'll take the loneliness. The problem with that is, and I'll say it 100 times, the enemy is a liar. He's not telling you the truth. He's not actually going to let you rescue anyone. He's just looking for your signature on the dotted line to agree to loneliness. So now your mom and you are going to drown in loneliness. If you were working through this trauma with your practitioner and the benefit or the final emotion that came up out of your entire session was loneliness and it came up as a transfer agreement, that's what you'd be working with. Same goes if the final emotion was anger or love unreturned or deprived. Whatever the final emotion is, that tells you the thing you were trying to rescue your mom from. Or let's say the story, rather, was something that you had. Like, let's say in that 10-year-old moment, you had happiness and your mom didn't because of the divorce that was happening. And the enemy goes, don't you want your mom to be happy? You could give her some of your happiness. And you're like, oh, that'd be great. I want to help my mom in that way, give her my happiness. You give your agreement, you sign on some sort of spiritual dotted line, and now you are signing away your ability to access the level of happiness that you were able to access before your parents separated. So if I was working with someone in this situation, I would expect them to say something like, I remember I used to be happy as a kid, but it's been a really long time. I can't remember the last time I felt happy. And then this whole story that we just went into, I would expect to come out. Happiness, joy, something like that being the last emotion that came out in a transfer agreement. And I would say, okay, it looks like the enemy convinced you that you could somehow share your happiness with your mom, but instead he tricked you into kind of just signing away your right to be happy. And you guys, we can literally undo these agreements from when you were 10 years old in a simple prayer that your practitioner will walk you through. Taking authority over the spiritual warfare, confessing that you believed something, a lie of the enemy, repenting of that agreement, asking the Holy Spirit to come into this place in you where this agreement has been living all these years. Asking him to plant the seeds of the opposite, to breathe new life into you and to start a new story in you as if that agreement has not been existing in you for the last 15, 20, 35 years, whatever it's been. And you guys, he does it. It's wild. And I think the thing I love the most about it is the enemy loses ground when we rip up that contract. We can rip up that contract in that prayer, and the enemy no longer has any legal right to pester you, manipulate you, shame you, or keep you stuck in prison in that way anymore. Every time we do a transfer agreement, we're going to be checking for breaking off, praying against any sort of ungodly soul tie between those two people. So if your client has a transfer agreement with a parent, with a best friend of theirs, and this is something that happens often with kids and parents. You're going to see transfer agreements often with kids and parents. There is going to be some sort of ungodly soul tie that was made in that moment. And so you just are always going to add that into your prayer. In the name of Jesus, in all of his authority, we break off any ungodly soul ties that connect this client with their mother in the way that they were trying to rescue her when she was going through her divorce. All right, next one is an assault agreement. This one is one that I've seen do some amazing things in people's lives when we've broken them off. It doesn't come up as often. But here in the training manual, it says an assault agreement occurs when the trauma was an attack of warfare. The enemy threatens something big. So the client, in response, makes some kind of bargain to avoid the threat. I'm going to give you a real life example of this, and I know I have permission to share this because this client of mine had come on the podcast prior and shared her story, but she had gone through cancer treatment, cancer diagnosis, and she came in because she was so wrapped up in anxiety. Her cancer was in remission. She was doing great, and she could not hardly breathe because the anxiety was so real and so thick. And so she was coming in hoping that we could do something to loosen this choking feeling of anxiety that she had with her all the time. And what came up was this spinal tap that she had when she was going through cancer treatment. And for whatever reason, where she was, this spinal tap failed like the first, I can't remember, 4 or 5 times. And so it was extremely painful, extremely long-suffering, drawn out, felt like the people that were around her didn't know what they were doing. It shouldn't take that many times. I think it was like a teaching hospital or something like that. And it was just like a perfect picture of her lowest moment in her cancer treatment. She had already lost her hair. She was so sick. She had lost a ton of weight. And now here she is, so vulnerable, doing this spinal tap over and over and over again. And it ultimately ended, because they had done it so many times, it ended in a spinal headache, which I have never had, but I have heard you can't even imagine the pain. And so she's laid out flat, stuck in bed for days with the most unimaginable headache because of this failed spinal tap. And this is the moment that came up in her Splankna session when we asked the Lord to point us to a moment where this anxiety came from. And what ended up coming up from that entire session was an assault agreement. And what the enemy had basically threatened her with was, you're going to die. This cancer is going to take you out. And the important thing to remember in that moment is the enemy does not get to tell us our days on this planet. He doesn't get to tell us how many we have left or when we are going to leave. He doesn't have that authority. But when we're vulnerable and broken and scared and exhausted, the strength it takes to overcome the fear of death is more than we have sometimes. When we're drawn on our own strength, when we're forgetting to lean on God, or when leaning on God just feels too hard and too impossible, that fear feels and sounds so real. And in an assault agreement, the enemy threatens something big, and we counter with something else. So it would sound something like, this cancer is going to take you out. This is going to be it for you. You're never going to be here to watch your kids grow up. And the counter would be something like, okay, if you just let me live, I'll settle with like a lifelong of anxiety, but just don't let me die. I'll settle with a lifelong fear of death if you actually just let me live. And the enemy's like, fine, great. There was your agreement to being stuck in fear of death. So how this was coming up for my client was, she told me every single time the phone rang, her entire body would go into panic because she would think it was the doctor calling her to tell her that her cancer was back. And she wasn't even waiting any test results. She wasn't having any testing done anymore. She was so far into remission. They were like seeing her every year for checkups, but randomly in any phone call in that year's time, when she's not even waiting for any doctor calls, the phone would just ring and it would just be like her neighbor or her friend. And instantly her body would prepare. Oh crap, that's the doctor telling me my cancer's back. And it was derailing. She's like, I can't function as a mom. I can't do my normal day-to-day tasks because this thing is swallowing me whole. So we broke this assault agreement. And she said, I knew before I sat in my car that day, before I even got out to the parking lot, that something had broken off of me. I could feel it instantly. And again, there's a whole prayer. If you have some sort of an assault agreement going on in your life, there's a whole prayer your practitioner will walk you through to break that off in prayer. And you guys, it's powerful. Our words, our prayers are so powerful. And the enemy does not want us to know that. The example that the training manual gives is like if a client has a generational history of schizophrenia in their family, the enemy threatens, hey, I'm going to get you too. You're going to get it too. And the client is like, somewhere subconsciously or spiritually saying, I can't have schizophrenia. That's torn my family apart. It's been awful. It's the scariest thing I could ever imagine. What about bipolar disorder instead? It's like a lesser attack. That'd be better. I'll agree to bipolar if you just don't give me schizophrenia. And then there's the agreement to have bipolar disorder. So all of this to say, I know you guys, I know this sounds wild because none of this happens consciously. I've seen it too many times to think that this is all wild. This stuff exists. It's true. I've seen breaking these agreements. I've seen it change people's lives over time. I've seen it change people's lives instantly. Like the client with the cancer that I just told you about, before she even got to her car, her anxiety lost all of its roots and it broke, and it has not come back since. I want you to know that sometimes an assault agreement is just spiritual warfare. So the trauma itself is the spiritual warfare. And sometimes we don't consciously know that there's spiritual warfare going on, but our subconscious knows and our spirit certainly knows. Our conscious mind, the part of our brain that pays attention to things and knows what's going on, is actually very, very limited compared to our subconscious mind. Our subconscious takes in so many more pieces of information than our conscious mind. It knows when there's spiritual warfare going on, even when you aren't aware of spiritual warfare going on. So practitioners, just know that if you have something going on, it comes up in a session, maybe it's age 23 for this client, and it turns out to be an assault agreement, and there's a lot of back of the heads, there's a lot of enemy aggression or focused on by the enemy. That's where you're going to see those emotions come up in these assault agreements. And sometimes it is in an actual event like cancer treatment. And sometimes it is just that was a season of life where there was a lot of spiritual warfare going on over that person. And they may or may not have been aware of that spiritual warfare because it happens in the background oftentimes. I did do a session one time a couple years ago, though, with someone, and this whole story came up, and I was explaining it to them and thinking, hey, sometimes this just happens and we don't even know the spiritual warfare is happening. It affects us on a spiritual, mental, emotional level, but we aren't aware that it's even happening. And this person goes, oh no, I remember this spiritual warfare. And she went on to describe the absolute debilitating fear that she felt at nighttime, feeling like someone was watching her, all this stuff that she had never experienced in her life. Kind of like that something in her knew something crazy was going on in her house. And it wasn't until she had someone coach her how to pray over her house, which was like this new place she was staying in, that feeling went away. But she's like, oh man, I remember those nights were terrifying. So whatever it was that we were working on in that session, we were breaking off something that she agreed to just because of this fear that she felt in her own residence at nighttime. All right, last one is a counter agreement. This one is a little more complex. Doesn't come up super often, but this is when the trauma that you're going to deal with is that somebody else made an agreement over your client. So if a client comes in and a counter agreement comes up, that means at some point in their life, let's go back to that divorce scenario just to keep it consistent. At some point in their life, at some point during that family's divorce and separation, one of the parents could have made an agreement over their child, subconsciously or spiritually. And it could sound like a million things. I'm just going to give one example. It could sound something like, I will never let that child out of my sight. This family's been torn apart. We just lost our marriage. I'm not going to lose my child too, so I will never let them out of my sight. And something unhealthy, something controlling takes over. Something shifts in that relationship, and that agreement starts to hold weight in a way of suffocating the kid feeling like they can never get out from underneath this parent who has maybe a controlling thumb over them. And in response to that, even if you don't consciously know that someone makes an agreement over you, you can make a counter agreement subconsciously or spiritually in order to protect yourself from the first agreement that was made over you. Okay? So a counter agreement is when the trauma is that someone else made an agreement over your client. You're going to break that. You're going to break the initial agreement that was made over them by their parent in this divorce situation. You're also going to break the counter agreement that your client made. And this agreement can be any style. And you don't even need details about what kind of an agreement was made over them. There's no way you're going to know in this 10-year-old story of the divorce what kind of an agreement was made over them from their parent. You don't need to know. You don't need to spend your time and energy on that. If it tests as a counter agreement, you just know that there was an agreement made over this client of yours when they were 10 years old and their parents were getting a divorce. You're going to repent on the other person's behalf, the person who made the first agreement, and you're just going to revoke it. We revoke any agreement that was made over this client when they were 10 years old and their parent was going through this. We take authority over the spiritual warfare. You're going to do the whole thing. And then you just break the one that you made in response. Because again, if you made an agreement to something, it's keeping you stuck somehow. It's messing with you somehow. It's keeping you twisted up in a way that is no longer beneficial to you. So you always, in this scenario, there are no good agreements that are actually helping you out in life. They are all pulling you away from God as your provider, pointing your eyes on you, your abilities or your lack of abilities, keeping you in fear, or getting your eyes to get fixed on the enemy instead of Christ. Every agreement that comes up in a Splankna session is a tactic of the enemy to keep you stuck, small, miserable, pulled away from the Lord. Okay. Again, those not comprehensive, but that is about a summary of all the different agreement styles. Just a reminder, if you've only been trained in the first level, core training, or if your practitioner, the person you see, has only been trained in core, you're not going to do any of this. Everything is just going to be a lie or a vow. And you'll be able to break it off, and you'll be able to renounce it and take authority of all of it. I just want to tell you, it is still so beneficial to work with someone that has been trained at the core level. They haven't gone to advanced yet. They haven't gone to masters yet. When I was in my core level, I was working with friends and family, learning, practicing, and the Lord did some amazingly powerful things with people just by breaking lies and vows. Because really, if you think about it, every agreement that we just spoke about is a lie or a vow in a very specific form. So one thing I get that I want to end with is I get a lot of messages from people saying, hey, there's no practitioners in my area. What do I do? I want you to know you can go on the website, splankna.com, splankna.com. and look for a practitioner in your area. If there's not one, just look for somebody who is listening prayer certified. That means they can do virtual sessions. And yes, they are just as effective. They are just as powerful. I will say that very plainly. Also, I have been told you can email admin@splankna.com, and that will likely get you in touch with Tracy. And there is a more comprehensive list of practitioners in the country that might be in your area. And so check with that email address as well. And because the people that are on the website are all certified, but there's a lot more practitioners that have been trained at the core level and the advanced level that just aren't certified yet, but they can still work with clients. So it wouldn't hurt to reach out to them as well and say, hey, I live in such and such a city. Would you mind telling me if there's anyone in my area from your list of people who are not on the actual website? All right. Thanks for being here with me. We went deep today. We talked protocol today. I love getting into that. If you have any questions on these agreements, please feel free to email me. I always put my information in the show notes. And I wanted to say, I connected all of these podcasts over to YouTube. If you could take a moment and go to YouTube and type in The Energy to Heal or Laura Milliken, both of them will pop up, and subscribe, comment, get some action going on. I'm really trying to get some momentum going on YouTube. And if you listen to this podcast and you've been here for a while, I would absolutely love if you would subscribe to the show. What that does is it tells the algorithm to kick the show out to more people. My goal is to get this kind of stuff out to people so that they can have access to not only this modality, but learning and growing in who they are in Christ, the authority they carry, the identity they carry, because Lord knows where we're living is an intense place and we need to know how to survive it. We need to know how to thrive and connect with Him in all of it. And that's my heart's desire. So if you could take a second to leave a comment, to subscribe, that would mean the absolute world to me. Love you guys. Thanks for being here.